Right now, as you rest, something is happening inside your skull that doesn't wait for your awareness. It's been happening since before you learned to speak, before you knew what empathy meant, before you understood that other people had inner lives separate from yours. Welcome to the Sleepy Biologist. This is a place for rest, for quiet biology, for the kind of curiosity that doesn't demand answers right away. If you're a channel member, thank you. Your support makes this possible. If you'd like to join, memberships are available, and super thanks are always appreciated. Either way, you're welcome here. Consider leaving a comment about where you're listening from tonight. It's good to know you're out there. Tonight we're looking at something your body does without asking. A neural event that erases the boundary between watching and feeling. You felt it before, you just didn't know it had a name. The system starts in a region of your brain called the premotor cortex. It sits near the front, just behind the forehead. It's involved in planning movement. When you reach for something, this area activates first. It prepares the muscles, readies the sequence, organizes the motion before it begins. But here's what happens when you watch someone else reach for something. The same region activates. Not as strongly, not enough to make you move, but enough to rehearse the motion internally. Your brain treats observation as a kind of preparation. It doesn't distinguish completely between doing and seeing. This happens because of a specific type of cell. They are called mirror neurons. They fire when you act. They also fire when you watch someone else act. The name is literal. They mirror what they observe. You've probably noticed this without naming it. Someone yawns near you and you feel the pull in your own jaw. Someone reaches toward a hot surface and you flinch slightly. Someone smiles and your face shifts, just barely in the same direction. You're not deciding to do this. It's automatic. The neurons don't care if the action belongs to you. They respond to the shape of the motion, the intention behind it, the goal it's moving toward. They see a hand closing and they simulate closing. They see a face tightening in pain and they simulate pain. Your body is constantly running quiet rehearsals of the world around you. This system exists in other animals too. Monkeys have it. Some birds have it. It's not unique to humans, but in humans it seems to reach further. It doesn't just copy actions, it copies emotional states. The neural regions involved in feeling your own sadness will activate faintly when you see someone else's sadness. Not because you're imagining their experience, because your brain is briefly living it. You already know this feeling. You've watched someone cry and felt your throat tighten. You've seen someone injured and felt a flicker of discomfort in your own body. This isn't metaphor. It's measurable. The brain scans show it clearly. Observation triggers the same regions that direct experience does. There's a theory that this is how empathy begins, not as a conscious choice to care, but as an automatic simulation. You understand what someone else feels because your brain is momentarily feeling it too. The line between you and them blurs at the neural level before you even realize you're paying attention. But the system has limits. It has to. If you mirrored every action and emotion you observed with full intensity, you'd lose track of yourself, you'd be overwhelmed. So there's a mechanism that dampens the signal. It allows the mirroring to happen, but keeps it below the threshold of action. You rehearse the motion internally, but you don't perform it. Most of the time this works, but not always. In some people the dampening is weaker. They mirror more intensely. They feel what others feel with less separation. This can make them deeply empathetic. It can also make them exhausted. There are conditions where the mirroring system behaves differently. Some autistic individuals show reduced mirror neuron activity in certain contexts. Some people with high emotional contagion show heightened activity. The system isn't fixed, it varies, and that variation shapes how you experience other people. When you watch someone in severe pain, a region called the anterior cingulate cortex activates. This is the same region that processes your own pain. It doesn't distinguish completely between pain you feel and pain you witness. The brain receives both signals as threat relevant. Both deserve attention. Both trigger a response. This is why watching violence can feel visceral, why certain images stay with you, why you might turn away from something even though you're not in danger. Your body is responding as if the threat is partly yours. The mirroring doesn't stop just because the experience isn't happening to you. And it's not just pain. Disgust works this way too. You see someone recoil from spoiled food and your own face tightens. You see someone about to vomit and your stomach clenches. The mirroring is preparing you. It's saying this might be relevant to you. Pay attention. The system is faster than conscious thought. By the time you recognize what you're seeing, your brain has already started mirroring it. The reaction comes first, the understanding comes after. This is why certain emotions feel immediate when you see them in others. You're not interpreting their face and then feeling something. You're feeling something and then realizing why. There's something else the system does. It helps you predict what someone will do next. By simulating their action internally, your brain can anticipate the outcome. You see someone reaching toward a glass and you know, before they complete the motion, whether they're going to pick it up or knock it over. The mirroring gives you a preview. This might be why humans are so good at collaboration. We can coordinate actions without speaking because we're constantly predicting each other's movements. The mirror system makes us porous to each other. Not completely, but enough. Children develop this system early. Newborns will imitate facial expressions within hours of birth. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand that the face they see belongs to someone else. But the mirroring is already there. It's one of the first ways they learn about the world. As you grow, the system refines. You learn which emotions to mirror and which to suppress. You learn when to let the boundary dissolve and when to reinforce it. But the automatic part never fully goes away. You're always mirroring at some level, even when you're trying not to. Right now, as you rest, your brain is quieter than usual. The mirroring system is less active. There's no one to observe, no gestures to rehearse, but it's still there, waiting. Tomorrow, when you see someone move, it will fire again. You won't notice. But your body will respond. The system doesn't ask if you want to understand someone. It just starts the process. And maybe that's why loneliness feels the way it does. Because mirroring is meant to be mutual. It's meant to connect. When there's no one to mirror, the system runs idle. It waits for input that doesn't come. But tonight, there's no one to mirror. Just your own breath. Just the stillness. The system rests. And so do you. You start to notice it once you know it's there. The way your hand almost moves when you watch someone else's hand move. Not quite, not visibly, but something shifts inside. A readiness. A shadow of motion that never completes itself. These are the cells that fire in sympathy. They don't wait to be invited. They respond to what they see as if it's already happening inside you. They were discovered by accident. A scientist in Italy was studying monkeys, recording neurons in the premotor cortex while a monkey reached for food. One day, a researcher reached for something instead, and the monkey's neurons fired. The same ones, even though the monkey hadn't moved. At first, it seemed wrong. Neurons weren't supposed to do that. They were supposed to fire during action, not observation. But the recording was clear. The cells responded to both. They called them mirror neurons, because that's what they do. They reflect what they witness. You have them too, scattered through several regions of your brain. Premotor cortex, inferior parietal lobule, superior temporal sulcus. They form a network, a system for simulation. When you see someone pick up a cup, certain neurons fire, not the ones that control your muscles, but the ones that plan the motion, the ones that understand the goal. They activate as if you're the one reaching. Your body doesn't move, but something inside you prepares. The intention forms without the action. The shape of the motion exists for a moment in your nervous system, then fades. This happens constantly. You watch someone turn a doorknob and your brain briefly knows how that feels. You watch someone type and your fingers hold a faint memory of keys. You're rehearsing gestures you'll never complete. It's stranger with emotions. You see someone wince and something tightens in you. Not thought, not sympathy yet, just a flicker of the same sensation. Your brain doesn't wait to understand what's happening. It mirrors first, interprets later. The cells don't distinguish between doing and witnessing. Not completely. They treat observation as a form of participation, as if watching is already a kind of action. This might be how you learned to move as a child, by watching others and feeling their motions echo inside you. The mirror system gave you a preview. Your body practiced in silence before attempting the real thing. Infants do this. They watch a face and their own face shifts. Tiny adjustments, muscle patterns they've never consciously tried. The mirroring is already working. You start to wonder if this is how you learned emotions too, by watching someone angry and feeling a faint version rise in you, by watching someone laugh and feeling your own chest lighten slightly. The mirror system doesn't just copy actions, it copies states. When you see a face in pain, a specific region activates. The anterior insula. It's involved in processing your own pain, but it also lights up when you witness someone else's. The same cells, the same signal. Your brain doesn't ask if the pain is yours, it responds as if it might be. There's something called emotional contagion. It's when feelings spread between people without intention. You enter a room where someone is anxious, and you become anxious, not because you're thinking about it, because your mirror system is picking up signals and reproducing them. This happens below awareness. The neurons fire, your body adjusts, your mood shifts. You don't realize you're mirroring until the feeling is already inside you. Some people mirror more than others. The intensity varies. In some brains, the mirror neurons fire strongly. In others, the signal is quieter. This changes how deeply you feel what others feel, how easily you're affected by someone else's emotional state. Children with stronger mirror systems tend to show more empathy early. They cry when other children cry. They comfort without being taught. The mirroring is doing the work before they understand what empathy means. But too much mirroring can be overwhelming. When the system fires too intensely, you lose track of where you end and someone else begins. Their emotion becomes yours. Their distress floods you. There's no separation. This is exhausting, constantly absorbing what others feel, never having space from it. The mirror system was meant to help you understand, not to consume you. There are people who have learned to dampen it, to create distance, not by shutting down empathy, but by recognizing when the mirroring is happening and gently separating their own feelings from the reflected ones. But the cells keep firing anyway. The system doesn't turn off. It just operates below the surface. Quiet, persistent, always listening. You see someone hesitate and your own body pauses slightly. You see someone reach with confidence and something in you steadies. The mirroring shapes you in ways you don't consciously track. And it's not just humans. You mirror animals too. You watch a bird take flight and something lifts in your chest. You watch a dog flinch and you feel the reflex echo. The mirror system doesn't require language. It responds to motion, to intention, to visible emotion. Even watching dance does this. Your brain activates motor regions as if you're the one moving. Dancers watching dance show more activity than non-dancers, because their brains have stronger motor memories to draw from. The mirroring is richer when you've done the motion yourself, but everyone mirrors to some degree, even if you've never danced, even if you've never played an instrument. Your brain still simulates what it sees, still rehearses in silence. Right now, there's nothing to mirror, no one moving nearby, no faces to read. Your mirror neurons are resting, not dormant, just waiting. They'll wake again tomorrow. When you see someone move, when you catch an expression, when you watch the world unfold around you. But for now, they're still. The cells that fire in sympathy have nothing to echo, and maybe that's part of why sleep feels the way it does, because the mirroring finally stops, because your brain is only yours for a while. No gestures to rehearse, no emotions to absorb, just the quiet of your own body, breathing, resting, separate from everyone else. The mirror system will return, it always does. But tonight it lets you be alone. There's a moment that happens when you see someone else injured, a moment before thought arrives, where your body tenses in a way that feels almost like pain but isn't quite pain, and it's not entirely clear what's happening in that gap between seeing and feeling, only that something inside you has responded as if the injury were partially yours, as if the boundary between their body and your body has become porous in a way you didn't authorize. This happens in a region called the anterior cingulate cortex, a structure buried deep in the midline of your brain, folded between the two hemispheres where it monitors signals related to distress, to error, to things going wrong in ways that require attention. When you stub your toe, this region activates. When you burn your hand, it lights up. When you feel the sharp sting of a paper cut, the anterior cingulate cortex registers it as something worth caring about, something that needs a response. But here's what happens when you watch someone else experience pain. The same region activates. Not as intensely as it would if you were the one injured, but enough that researchers can see it clearly in brain scans. Your anterior cingulate cortex responds to witnessed pain as if it were a signal your own body needs to process. It doesn't fully distinguish between pain happening to you and pain happening near you. Both are treated as relevant. Both trigger a version of the same neural pathway. This isn't a mistake. It's not your brain confusing one person for another. It's a system that evolved to treat the suffering of others as information worth internalizing, worth preparing for, worth responding to, even when you're not the one in danger. Pain in your vicinity might predict pain coming toward you. Pain in someone you care about might require you to act. The nervous system doesn't wait to verify ownership before it begins its response. When you see someone's face contort in pain, several things happen nearly simultaneously. Your mirror neurons fire, simulating the facial expression internally so that your own face begins to shift subtly toward the same configuration. Your amygdala activates, flagging the scene as emotionally significant. Your anterior cingulate cortex registers the pain signal, and your insula, a region involved in processing bodily sensations and emotional awareness, lights up as well. All of this happens before you've consciously decided to feel empathy, before you've thought about what you're seeing, before you've even named the emotion on the other person's face. The insula is particularly interesting because it seems to bridge the gap between what you feel in your own body and what you perceive in someone else's. It's active when you experience disgust, when you feel your heartbeat quicken, when you notice a change in your breathing. But it's also active when you see someone else disgusted, when you watch someone in distress, when you observe another person's body in a state you recognize as uncomfortable. The insula treats witnessed states as if they're partly felt states, as if observation is a diluted form of experience. It's not entirely clear why this system exists with such sensitivity, why the brain would dedicate resources to feeling an echo of someone else's pain when that pain poses no direct threat to you. One possibility is that it makes caregiving more effective. If you can feel a shadow of what someone else feels, you're more likely to help them, more motivated to reduce their suffering because in some small neural way, reducing their suffering reduces your own discomfort. The system makes empathy automatic, not optional. Another possibility is that it helps you learn. By watching someone else get hurt and feeling a trace of their pain, your brain logs the situation as something to avoid. You don't need to touch the hot stove yourself if watching someone else touch it creates enough of a pain signal to encode the danger. The mirrored pain acts as a warning, a way to learn from others' mistakes without paying the full cost. But the system doesn't always serve you well. There are moments when the mirrored pain becomes too much, when you're exposed to suffering you can't alleviate and your nervous system keeps responding anyway, keeps registering the distress as something urgent even though there's nothing you can do. Healthcare workers experience this. People who work in trauma settings, people who witness suffering repeatedly without being able to stop it. The anterior cingulate cortex doesn't stop firing just because the situation is beyond your control. It keeps treating the pain as relevant, keeps asking your body to respond, and over time this can lead to a kind of neural exhaustion, a wearing down of the system that was meant to protect and connect you. There's also something called pain asymbolia, a rare condition where people can perceive pain but don't find it distressing. They feel the sensation but not the suffering. When these individuals see others in pain, their anterior cingulate cortex shows reduced activity compared to people without the condition. It's as if the system that links pain to distress in their own body is also responsible for linking witnessed pain to empathic distress. When one is disrupted, the other is too. This suggests that the ability to care about someone else's pain depends on your ability to care about your own. That empathy is built on top of self-preservation, not separate from it. Then there are people on the other end of the spectrum, people whose mirror systems fire so strongly that they can barely watch someone get a vaccine without feeling a phantom sting in their own arm. People who wince when they see an athlete injured on television. People who have to look away during certain scenes in movies because the mirrored sensation is too vivid. For them, the boundary between observation and experience is thinner than average. Their nervous systems treat witnessed pain as nearly equivalent to felt pain. And while this might make them deeply empathetic, it also makes the world harder to navigate. You might have noticed this in yourself without naming it. The way your muscles tense when you see someone fall. The way your stomach drops slightly when you watch someone receive bad news. The way your breath catches when you see a near-miss accident. These aren't conscious choices. They're not you deciding to feel something. They're your nervous system mirroring the state it observes, preparing your body as if the event might happen to you next, as if the pain or fear or shock might cross over. And sometimes it does feel like it crosses over. There are moments when you see something painful and the echo inside you is so strong that you're not sure afterward whether you imagined the sensation or actually felt it. The line blurs. Your brain has simulated the experience vividly enough that it leaves a trace, a kind of sensory memory that wasn't earned through direct contact but through observation so focused that it became almost tactile. This happens more easily with people you're close to. When you watch someone you love in pain, your anterior cingulate cortex responds more strongly than when you watch a stranger. The system doesn't treat all pain equally. It prioritizes the suffering of those you care about, amplifies the signal, makes their distress more urgent in your own neural landscape. This might be why it's harder to watch a loved one suffer than to suffer yourself sometimes, because their pain, activates your pain systems without giving you the clarity of knowing exactly what hurts or how to fix it. But even with strangers, the system still fires, reduced perhaps, quieter, but present. You see someone on the street stumble and your body reacts before you know anything about them, before you've assessed whether they need help, before you've decided whether to care. The mirroring happens first, the decision comes later. It's not entirely clear where this system will take us as a species, whether increasing connectivity and constant exposure to others' suffering through screens and media will heighten our empathy or numb it, whether the mirror system will adapt to the new volume of witnessed pain or whether it will become overwhelmed, desensitized, less responsive over time. The system wasn't designed for this much input. It evolved in small groups where the pain you witnessed was usually pain you could do something about. Now you can see suffering from across the world, suffering you have no direct way to alleviate, and your anterior cingulate cortex still responds, still flags it as urgent, still asks your body to care. And maybe that's why compassion fatigue exists, why people eventually have to look away. Not because they stop caring, but because the system that makes them care was never meant to hold this much. Tonight, there's no pain to witness, no one nearby who's hurt. Your anterior cingulate cortex is quiet, at least in that particular way. Still monitoring other things, still tracking errors and discomfort and things that need your attention, but it's not mirroring anyone else's suffering right now. And maybe that's part of what rest is, a break from feeling what others feel, a chance for the system to stop echoing. Your face is always listening. Even when you're not paying attention, even when you think you're simply observing, the muscles beneath your skin are shifting in small ways, adjusting themselves to match the faces around you. This happens in the first few 100 milliseconds of seeing someone's expression. Before you've named what they're feeling, before you've decided how to respond. It starts with the eyes. When you look at someone's eyes, your gaze moves in patterns, landing first on the eyes, then the mouth, then back to the eyes again. This isn't random. Your visual system has been trained since infancy to prioritize these features because they carry the most information about emotional state. The eyes tell you about attention and intensity. The mouth tells you about pleasure or distress. Together, they form a map your brain reads automatically. But reading isn't quite the right word. Because your brain doesn't just look at the face and decode it like text, it simulates the face. It activates the same muscles in your own face that would create that expression, just barely. Just enough to generate an internal sense of what that expression feels like to make. This is called facial mimicry. It's subtle, often invisible to an observer, but it's measurable. Researchers can place electrodes on facial muscles and detect tiny contractions that correspond to the expressions people are viewing. You see someone smile and your zygomaticus major, the muscle that pulls your mouth into a smile, activates slightly. You see someone frown and your corrugator supercilii, the muscle that pulls your eyebrows together, tightens. These movements are involuntary. You're not choosing to copy the face. Your mirror system is doing it for you, recreating the expression as a way of understanding it. The mimicry sends signals back to your brain about what the expression feels like, and this information helps you recognize the emotion faster and more accurately. It's a bit like learning a language through imitation. When you hear a new word, you might silently mouth it, feeling how your tongue and lips move to make that sound. Your face does something similar with emotions. It briefly produces the shape, feels the shape, and uses that felt experience to interpret what the other person is experiencing. Children learn emotions this way long before they have words for them. An infant sees a parent's face light up, and their own face responds, muscles pulling into a crude approximation of joy. They don't know yet what joy is called or what it means socially, but their body is already learning the physical pattern, the way it feels to arrange a face in that particular configuration. Over time, these patterns become deeply familiar. Your face has made certain expressions thousands of times. Happiness, fear, disgust, surprise. Each one has a distinct muscular signature, a specific combination of contractions and releases that your brain associates with a particular internal state. So when you see someone else's face in one of these configurations, your own facial muscles respond, and that response generates a felt sense that helps you identify what you're looking at. This is why it's harder to read emotions accurately when you can't see someone's whole face. A mask covering the lower half removes crucial information. Your face can't fully mimic what it can't see. The feedback loop is incomplete. You might still pick up clues from the eyes, from the context, from the voice, but the automatic facial understanding is weakened. It's also why reading emotions in photographs can feel different from reading them in person. A photograph freezes the expression, holds it still, but in real life, faces are constantly moving, shifting through micro-expressions that last only fractions of a second. Your face tracks these movements, adjusting continuously, and this ongoing mimicry creates a richer sense of what the other person is feeling than a single frozen image can provide. There are people who don't mimic faces in the typical way. Some autistic individuals show reduced facial mimicry, particularly for expressions they find confusing or ambiguous. This doesn't mean they can't learn to recognize emotions, but the automatic felt pathway might be less available to them. They might rely more on learned patterns, on conscious analysis, on context, rather than on the immediate felt sense that mimicry provides. And then there are people who mimic too much, whose faces respond so strongly to others' expressions that they feel flooded by the emotions around them. Their facial muscles are constantly working, constantly copying, constantly feeding emotional signals back to their brains. This can make social situations exhausting because their own emotional state becomes entangled with everyone else's. But for most people, the mimicry happens at a level that's helpful without being overwhelming. Your face makes small adjustments. Your brain receives the feedback. You understand what you're seeing without consciously thinking through the process. The system works both ways. When you deliberately make a facial expression, even without any genuine emotion behind it, your brain receives signals from your facial muscles that can actually influence how you feel. This is called the facial feedback hypothesis. Smile for long enough, even a forced smile, and your mood might improve slightly. Furrow your brow in concentration and you might start to feel more focused or slightly more stressed. The expression shapes the emotion, not just the other way around. This might be why masking your emotions takes effort. When you're sad but trying to appear neutral, you're fighting against your face's natural inclination to express what you feel. You have to consciously control muscles that usually operate automatically. And because your face wants to match your internal state, holding a neutral expression while feeling intense emotion creates a kind of internal tension, a disconnect between what you're feeling and what your face is doing. It also explains why watching someone cry can make your own eyes water, even if you're not particularly sad. Your face has started to mimic the expression. Your facial muscles have activated in a pattern associated with crying. The feedback from those muscles is telling your brain that something sad is happening, and your body responds by preparing to cry as well, even though the sadness isn't originally yours. The muscles involved in facial expressions are small, precise. The orbicularis oculi wraps around your eye. The levator labii raises your upper lip. The depressor angulioris pulls the corners of your mouth down. There are dozens of these muscles, and they can combine in countless ways to create the vast range of human expressions. Your brain has learned to read all of these combinations, and it's learned to read them by reproducing them. This happens across cultures. While some aspects of emotional expression vary between societies, the basic facial configurations for emotions like fear, disgust, happiness, and anger are remarkably consistent. Your face mimics these patterns regardless of where you grew up because the underlying muscle movements are universal, tied to evolutionary responses that predate culture. But there are also learned components. The exact way you express certain emotions, the intensity, the timing, the suppression or exaggeration, these are shaped by the faces you grew up around. Your mimicry system learned from the people near you. It absorbed their patterns. So in some small way, your face carries traces of your family's faces, your community's faces, not through genetics, but through years of unconscious copying. Right now, there are no faces to read, no expressions to mimic. Your facial muscles are at rest. They're not making tiny adjustments to match someone else's emotional state. They are not sending feedback signals to your brain about what they're feeling. This is part of what sleep preparation does. It removes you from the social world where your face is constantly working, constantly responding. It gives your facial muscles a break from the job of understanding others through imitation. Your face will return to that work tomorrow. It will see expressions and copy them and help you understand what you're seeing. But tonight, it rests. The muscles soften, the mimicry stops, and your face for a little while belongs only to you. The boundary exists as inhibition, a suppression signal, something that tells your motor cortex not to act on what the mirror neurons are rehearsing. You watch someone lift their arm and your brain simulates the movement, prepares the muscles, organizes the sequence. But then another signal arrives. A veto. The movement stops before it starts. This inhibition comes from several sources. The prefrontal cortex plays a role. So does the supplementary motor area. They monitor the difference between intended action and observed action. They keep the simulation internal. They prevent you from unconsciously copying every gesture you see. When this system functions normally, you're aware of the boundary. You know you're watching someone else. You know their actions aren't yours. The line stays clear, but the system can fail. There's a condition called echopraxia where people involuntarily imitate the movements of others. They see someone tap their fingers and their own fingers begin tapping. They see someone stand and they stand too. The inhibitory signal isn't arriving properly. The mirror system runs without restraint. Observation collapses into action. This happens in certain neurological conditions, frontal lobe damage, some forms of autism, Tourette syndrome. The boundary weakens. The person loses control over what stays simulation and what becomes movement. But even in healthy brains, the boundary isn't absolute. You've probably felt it slip. Watching someone yawn and finding yourself yawning too. Watching someone scratch and feeling an itch rise on your own skin. These are mild versions of the same phenomenon. The inhibition loosens slightly. The mirroring breaks through. It happens more easily when you're tired, when your prefrontal cortex is less active, when the regulatory systems are running at lower capacity. The boundary needs energy to maintain. When that energy drops, the line blurs. Hypnosis seems to work partly by weakening this boundary. During hypnotic states, people become more suggestible, more likely to act on observed or suggested actions. The mirror system's output isn't being filtered as strictly. What's observed or imagined can more easily become what's done. Dancers know this feeling. When you watch skilled movement and your body begins responding before you've decided to move, the mirror neurons are firing strongly because you have motor memories that match what you're seeing. The boundary thins. Your body wants to join the motion. Musicians experience it too. Watching someone play an instrument you know and feeling your fingers move slightly, phantom pressing keys or strings. The mirror system doesn't just simulate the visible motion, it simulates the entire sequence, including the parts you can't see, the internal preparation, the intention behind each note. This is how learning often works. You watch someone demonstrate a skill and your mirror system creates an internal model. Your brain rehearses the action repeatedly, silently. When you finally attempt it yourself, you're not starting from nothing. You've already practiced in simulation. But there's a cost to permeable boundaries. When the separation between self and other weakens too much, you lose track of whose experience is whose emotion you're feeling, whose intention is driving the action. The mirroring becomes invasive. There are reports from people who've experienced extreme empathy or emotional contagion, describing it as a loss of self. They enter a room and immediately absorb the emotional atmosphere. Someone near them is anxious and they become anxious. Someone is angry and anger rises in them. They can't distinguish their own baseline state from the states they're mirroring. This isn't poetic language. It's a description of what happens when the boundary fails. When the inhibitory systems can't keep the mirrored content separate. When observation floods into experience without a clear marker that says, "This isn't mine." Children struggle with this boundary early on. A toddler sees another child crying and often begins crying too, not out of sympathy necessarily. The emotional contagion is automatic. Their mirror system is active, but the regulatory systems that create separation are still developing. They haven't learned yet how to keep someone else's distress from becoming their own. Over time, most people develop stronger boundaries. They learn to recognize when an emotion originated externally. They learn to witness without absorbing. But the system remains vulnerable. Stress weakens it. Trauma can damage it. Certain psychiatric conditions alter it. People with borderline personality disorder sometimes describe unstable sense of self, a feeling that their identity shifts depending on who they're with. Part of this might involve an overactive mirror system combined with weaker inhibitory control. They mirror intensely and can't fully separate what they're mirroring from what they genuinely feel. Then there's the opposite problem. Some people have boundaries that are too rigid. Their mirror systems fire weakly or their inhibitory systems are too strong. They observe others but feel little internal resonance. They understand emotions intellectually, but don't feel the echo that usually accompanies observation. This can look like coldness, like lack of empathy, but it's not always a lack of caring. Sometimes it's a nervous system that doesn't blur the boundary even slightly. Observation stays observation. The internal simulation is muted. There's no risk of confusion because there's no overlap. It's not entirely clear which configuration is ideal. Too much boundary and you're isolated. Too little and you're overwhelmed. Most people exist somewhere in the middle, with a boundary that flexes depending on context, that thins with loved ones and thickens with strangers, that weakens when tired and strengthens when alert. The boundary also changes with attention. When you're focused on someone intensely, your mirror system fires more strongly. The simulation is richer. The boundary has to work harder to keep things separate. This is why intense eye contact can feel overwhelming. You're not just looking at someone, you're mirroring them continuously, and your inhibitory systems are working constantly to keep that mirroring from becoming experience. Look away and the boundary relaxes. The mirroring quiets. You're no longer tracking every micro-expression, every gesture. The separation returns naturally. This might be part of why solitude feels restorative. When there's no one to mirror, the boundary doesn't have to work. The system that keeps you separate from others can rest because there's nothing to separate from. You're just yourself. No simulations running, no need for inhibition. But complete isolation for too long can make the boundary strange in a different way. People who spend extended time alone sometimes report that returning to social situations feels overwhelming. The mirror system has gone quiet for so long that when it reactivates, the boundaries feel uncertain. The sudden flood of mirroring is disorienting. The system needs regular use to calibrate properly. It needs to practice the rhythm of mirroring and separating, of simulating and inhibiting, of feeling with others while remaining distinct from them. Right now, alone in the quiet, your boundary is easy to maintain. There's nothing pushing against it. No observed actions trying to become your actions, no witnessed emotions trying to become your emotions. The inhibitory systems are still active, still monitoring, but they have little work to do. The prefrontal cortex tracks your own intentions without needing to distinguish them from anyone else's. The supplementary motor area organizes movements that are fully yours. The boundary holds not because it's strong, but because it's not being tested, and maybe that's enough for tonight. A break from the constant work of staying separate. A few hours where the line between you and everyone else doesn't need defending. Tomorrow it will matter again. Tomorrow you'll need the boundary to function, to keep you distinct while still allowing connection. But for now, the question of where you end and someone else begins has no urgency. There's no one else. Just you, just the body breathing in the dark, the boundary unchallenged, the mirror system quiet. There's a moment before you know you're feeling something, a fraction of a second where your body has already begun responding to what it sees, but your conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. And in that gap, the mirroring has already started. The neurons have already fired. The simulation is already running through your motor cortex and your emotional centers without asking whether you want to participate, without waiting for your permission to begin the process of understanding through imitation. You see someone reach for something, and before you've registered what they're reaching for, before you've thought about why they're moving or what they intend to do, your premotor cortex has already activated the neural patterns associated with reaching, has already begun organizing the muscle sequences that would be required if you were the one extending your arm. And this happens so quickly that by the time you're aware you're watching someone reach, your brain has already rehearsed the motion internally, has already created a faint motor echo of the action you're observing. The system doesn't ask if this is important, doesn't check whether you care about this person or whether their actions matter to you. It simply responds to the presence of intentional movement in your visual field, treats it as information worth processing through simulation, and the simulation begins before you've made any conscious decision about attention or empathy or connection. This is what makes the mirroring system so fundamental, so automatic, because it operates below the threshold of choice, below the level where you decide how to feel or whether to care. It's part of the basic machinery of perception, woven into the way your brain processes the presence of other bodies, other intentions, other minds in your vicinity. When you see a face contorted in pain, your anterior cingulate cortex responds within milliseconds, faster than conscious recognition, faster than the thought, "This person is hurt," faster than any decision about whether to feel sympathy, and in that first rapid response your brain is already treating the observed pain as partly relevant to your own body, as a signal that deserves neural resources, that needs to be processed through the systems that handle distress and threat and discomfort. You don't tell your brain to do this. You don't decide that witnessing pain should activate your own pain networks. It happens automatically because the system was built to assume that pain near you might be pain coming toward you, that distress in your environment is information worth internalizing quickly. without the delay that conscious processing would introduce. The mirroring extends to intentions as well. Not just completed actions, but the beginning of actions, the preparatory phase where someone is about to move but hasn't moved yet. And your mirror neurons can detect this, can pick up on the subtle shifts in posture and gaze and muscle tension that signal imminent movement, and they begin firing before the action is completed, sometimes before it's even started, creating a predictive simulation that allows you to anticipate what someone will do next based on mirroring the intention you see forming in their body. This is how you catch a glass someone's about to knock over, how you step aside before someone fully commits to walking through the space you're occupying, how you know someone is about to speak before they've opened their mouth, because your mirror system is tracking microsignals and simulating the intentions behind them, giving you a preview of what's coming based on patterns your brain has learned to recognize and reproduce internally. The automation of this system is both its strength and its vulnerability, because it means you're constantly absorbing information from the people around you without filtering it first, without deciding whether you want to be affected by their emotional states or their intentions or their distress, and most of the time this serves you well. It helps you navigate social situations smoothly, helps you coordinate with others, helps you respond appropriately to what you're seeing. But sometimes it means you're mirroring things you'd rather not mirror, feeling echoes of emotions you don't want to feel, simulating actions and states that don't serve you. The system has no off switch, no way to selectively disable it when you prefer not to be affected by what you're observing. And this is because the mirroring happens at a level of neural processing that precedes conscious control. It's embedded in the sensory and motor pathways themselves, not in the higher-order cognitive systems that make decisions and exercise willpower. You can learn to recognize when mirroring is happening, can become aware of the moment when someone else's emotion starts to echo inside you, can notice when your face is beginning to copy an expression or your body is starting to shift in response to someone else's posture. But even with that awareness, you can't stop the initial response. You can only choose how to handle it once it's begun, can decide whether to lean into the mirroring or to consciously separate yourself from it. Some people become skilled at this, at noticing the early signs of mirroring and creating internal distance before the emotional sensation fully takes root. And this isn't the same as suppressing empathy or shutting down emotionally. It's more like recognizing that the first wave of feeling isn't necessarily yours, that it's a mirrored response that you can acknowledge without fully inhabiting, can observe without letting it determine your own emotional state. But this skill takes practice, takes repeated exposure to situations where you notice the mirroring happening and consciously remind yourself of the boundary between what you're observing and what you're experiencing directly. And even then, the automatic response continues. The mirror neurons keep firing, the simulations keep running. You just become better at recognizing them for what they are. The mirroring is especially strong with people you're close to, with people you've spent significant time around, because your brain has built detailed motor and emotional models of them through years of observation and interaction. And when you see them move or feel or express something, your internal simulation is richer, more detailed, more embodied than it would be with a stranger, and this creates a deeper sense of connection, but also a greater vulnerability to emotional contagion, to absorbing their states more readily, because the neural pathways are well established, well practiced. This is part of what intimacy is, neurologically speaking, a set of highly developed mirror pathways that allow you to simulate another person's experience with unusual accuracy and detail, that allow you to predict their responses and understand their emotions and coordinate with them smoothly. But it also means you're more permeable to their states, more likely to find their anxiety becoming your anxiety, their sadness becoming your sadness, their stress becoming your stress, because the mirroring is so automatic and so vivid. Right now, there's no one to mirror, no faces expressing emotions that your face wants to copy, no bodies moving in ways that your motor cortex wants to simulate, no intentions forming that your mirror neurons want to track and predict. And in this absence, the system finally rests, not because you've turned it off, but because there's nothing in your environment triggering it, nothing activating those pathways that usually fire constantly throughout the day as you navigate the social world. The mirror neurons are still there, still capable of responding instantly if a face appeared or a hand reached toward you. But they're quiet now, unstimulated, waiting without anticipation because the automatic system doesn't anticipate. It only responds. It only mirrors what's actually present. And right now, nothing is present except your own body, your own breath, your own steady drift towards sleep. The empathy that doesn't wait for permission has nowhere to direct itself, no one to understand through simulation. And maybe this is part of what makes aloneness restful. Not the absence of others exactly, but the absence of constant mirroring, the break from automatically processing everyone else's states and intentions and emotions, the few hours where your nervous system only has to attend to you. The system was designed for balance, mirror enough to understand, not so much that you lose yourself, a signal strong enough to create connection, but weak enough to maintain separation. For most people, this balance holds. The mirroring happens at a manageable intensity. You feel an echo of what others feel, but the echo stays faint, recognizable but distant. But not everyone's system operates at the same volume. Some brains amplify the mirror signal. The neurons fire more intensely. The simulation runs deeper. What should be a faint echo becomes something louder, more vivid, harder to distinguish from direct experience. Researchers have found differences in mirror neuron activity across individuals. Some people show heightened responses when observing emotions or actions. The same stimulus that produces mild activity in one person's brain produces strong activity in another's. This isn't a disorder. It's variation. But the variation has consequences. When your mirror system fires too strongly, you don't just understand what someone else feels, you absorb it. Their anxiety enters your body as physical tension. Their sadness settles into your chest. Their anger rises in you even though nothing has angered you directly. The boundary between observation and experience thins. What you witness starts to feel like what you're living. People describe this as exhausting. Being in a room with someone upset and feeling your own nervous system respond as if the upset were yours. Watching someone in pain and carrying a phantom version of that pain for hours afterward. The mirroring doesn't stop when the observation ends. The neural patterns linger. The emotional residue remains. This happens more easily with negative emotions. Your brain prioritizes threat-related signals. Fear, anger, distress. These activate your mirror system more strongly than contentment or calm. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Mirroring danger helps you survive. Mirroring peace doesn't offer the same advantage. But it means that people with heightened mirroring tend to absorb negative states more readily than positive ones. They walk through the world collecting fragments of other people's distress. Over time, this accumulates. The nervous system becomes overloaded. You start to feel emotions that don't correspond to anything in your own life. You're anxious, but you can't identify why. You're sad, but nothing sad has happened to you. The feelings are real, but they originated elsewhere. Some people with this pattern avoid crowds. Too many emotional signals at once. Too much to mirror. The system floods. Others become hypervigilant about other people's states. They scan faces constantly, trying to assess emotional atmosphere before entering a space. They need to know what they are about to absorb. There's a term for this: emotional contagion susceptibility. How easily you catch emotions from others, how permeable you are to external emotional states. High susceptibility isn't the same as high empathy. Empathy involves understanding and caring. Contagion is just absorption. You can catch someone's anxiety without caring about them at all. The mirroring happens regardless. Children often show high contagion. One baby cries and others start crying. The mirror system is active, but the regulatory mechanisms are immature. They haven't learned how to dampen the signal yet. Most people develop better regulation with age. The prefrontal cortex matures. Inhibitory systems strengthen. The mirroring continues but stays contained. But some people never develop strong regulation. Or stress erodes what regulation they had. Or trauma disrupts the systems that maintain boundaries. When regulation fails, mirroring becomes invasive. You lose track of which emotions are genuinely yours. Your internal state becomes unstable, shifting with whoever you're near. Therapists experience this sometimes. Sitting with distressed clients for hours, the mirror system activates repeatedly. Compassion fatigue isn't just mental exhaustion, it's neural exhaustion. The circuits that process and mirror distress become depleted. There are strategies people use to manage this. Some create physical distance, limit exposure to emotionally intense situations, choose solitude more often. Others practice conscious separation. They notice when they're mirroring and mentally label it. This is their anxiety, not mine. The labeling doesn't stop the mirroring, but it helps maintain perspective. Some people report that naming the emotion out loud helps. Speaking it creates distance. I'm noticing I feel tense after that conversation. The statement acknowledges the mirroring while reinforcing that it's a response, not an originating feeling. Movement helps too. Physical activity can clear mirrored emotional states. The body processes the absorbed tension, releases it. You're not just distracting yourself, you're giving your nervous system a way to discharge what it's holding. But these are management strategies. They don't change the underlying pattern. The mirror system continues firing intensely. You just become better at handling what it produces. It's worth noting that strong mirroring isn't always problematic. It can make you deeply attuned to others, sensitive to subtle shifts in mood, able to offer support before someone asks for it. The difficulty comes when the mirroring is chronic and unmanageable, when you can't turn it down, when it interferes with your ability to know your own emotional baseline. Right now, there's nothing to mirror. No one nearby emitting emotional signals, no distress to absorb, no joy to catch. Your mirror system rests at its baseline. Whatever your baseline is, whether it runs hot or cool, whether it amplifies or dampens, but for tonight it's not being tested. The neurons are quiet. The boundary, however strong or weak it typically is, isn't being challenged. And maybe that's part of what sleep offers. A pause from absorption, a break from carrying pieces of everyone else's internal weather. Just your own state, just your own body, settling toward rest. Energy is finite in the brain, distributed among competing demands, and the mirror system requires its share even though you're not consciously aware of the expenditure, even though the work it does feels automatic and effortless. But effort is still happening. Each time your mirror neurons fire, they consume glucose. Each simulation your motor cortex runs requires resources. Each emotional state your insular processes draws from the same metabolic pool that supports all your other neural functions. When you're around people constantly, the system never fully rests. It tracks faces, simulates gestures, processes emotional shifts, predicts intentions. This happens in the background of your awareness. You're having a conversation and simultaneously your brain is monitoring micro-expressions, adjusting your own facial muscles in response, maintaining the neural simulation that helps you understand what the other person is feeling and intending. All of this costs energy. Most of the time you don't notice. The brain is efficient. It handles multiple processes simultaneously without conscious strain. But efficiency doesn't mean free. Over hours of social interaction, the cumulative cost adds up. The mirror system has been active continuously. The neurons have fired thousands of times. The simulations have run without pause. You start to feel it as a vague tiredness that isn't quite physical. Your body hasn't exerted itself, but something feels depleted. This is neural fatigue. People who work in emotionally intensive environments know this feeling well. Therapists, teachers, healthcare workers, customer service representatives. Anyone whose job requires constant attention to other people's emotional states. Their mirror systems run at high intensity for extended periods. The neurons fire repeatedly. The emotional processing centers activate again and again. By the end of the day, they're exhausted in a way that rest doesn't immediately resolve. Sleep helps, but recovery takes time. The neural circuits need to replenish. Neurotransmitters need to be synthesized. Metabolic waste needs to be cleared. This is part of what happens during sleep. The glymphatic system, which clears metabolic debris from the brain, becomes more active. The constant neural firing slows. The circuits that have been working all day get a chance to reset. But if you return to intense mirroring too quickly, before full recovery, the fatigue compounds. The system starts each day slightly more depleted than it began the previous one. Over weeks or months, this creates a baseline exhaustion. The mirror neurons still fire, but the responses become less precise. The emotional resonance feels blunted. You're still mirroring, but the quality of the mirroring degrades. This isn't numbness exactly. It's more like a dimming. The system is trying to conserve resources by reducing output. Some people interpret this as losing empathy. They notice they're less affected by others' emotions than they used to be. They worry they've become callous or disconnected. But often it's just fatigue. The circuits are tired. They're operating at reduced capacity to protect themselves from complete depletion. The fatigue can also manifest as irritability. Small social demands feel disproportionately taxing. Someone asks a simple question, and it feels like an enormous imposition. This happens because your regulatory resources are low. The prefrontal cortex, which manages social responses and inhibits inappropriate reactions, requires significant energy to function well. When depleted, regulation weakens, responses become less controlled. You might snap at someone when you normally wouldn't, not because you're angry, but because the system that modulates your reactions is running on empty. The cost of resonance is also emotional. When you mirror distress repeatedly, your own emotional baseline shifts. You become more prone to anxiety or sadness, not because your life circumstances have changed, but because you've been processing these states constantly through observation. Your brain treats mirrored emotions as partly real. They activate similar pathways. Over time, this repeated activation can lower your threshold for those emotions. It becomes easier to feel anxious because the neural patterns associated with anxiety have been running frequently. Some research suggests that people with jobs requiring high emotional labor show changes in brain structure over time. Regions involved in emotional regulation and stress response show differences compared to people in less emotionally demanding work. The brain adapts to what it does repeatedly. If it's constantly mirroring and regulating strong emotions, those circuits strengthen. But strengthening doesn't mean the work becomes less costly. It just means you become better at doing costly work. Recovery requires genuine rest from mirroring. Time alone, time without faces to read. Time when your mirror neurons aren't firing constantly. This is why solitude feels restorative for some people. Not because they dislike others, but because their nervous system needs a break from the continuous work of resonance. Even brief periods help. 10 minutes in a quiet room, a walk alone, time when you're not processing anyone else's emotional state. The circuits begin to settle, the metabolic demands decrease, the fatigue starts to lift. Right now you're in that recovery space. No one to mirror, no expressions to track, no emotional states to process beyond your own. Your mirror system is quiet, the neurons aren't firing, the energy they would normally consume is available for other processes, for repair, for rest, for the slow work of recovery that happens when the constant echo finally stops. You see someone's hand near a flame and something tightens in your own hand. Not thought, not concern yet, just a physical response that arrives before you've processed what you're seeing. Your brain has registered potential injury. It's begun preparing a withdrawal response. The muscles in your hand have received preliminary signals even though your hand is nowhere near danger. This happens in milliseconds. The visual information reaches your brain. The mirror system activates. The motor cortex simulates the observed action. And somewhere in that rapid sequence, the distinction between their body and your body becomes unclear. The pain networks don't always wait for confirmation that the injury is yours. When you watch someone receive an injection, your anterior cingulate cortex activates. This is the region that processes the unpleasantness of pain, the emotional component that makes pain something you want to avoid. It responds to witnessed pain almost as readily as it responds to direct pain. The intensity is lower, but the pattern is similar. Your brain is treating the observed needle as partially relevant to your own body. You might flinch. You might look away. These are protective responses triggered by pain that isn't happening to you. The system prioritizes speed over accuracy. Better to respond to a false alarm than to miss a real threat. So when it sees pain, it assumes relevance first and verifies later. Most of the time, the correction happens quickly. Within a fraction of a second, your brain has determined that the injury isn't yours. The withdrawal response is cancelled, the pain signal fades, but the initial response still occurred, and that initial response leaves traces. People who watch surgery, even simulated surgery in videos, show activation in their own somatosensory cortex. This is the region that maps physical sensations onto the body. It's creating a felt sense of the incision, even though no incision is occurring. Some people report actually feeling pain when they watch certain injuries, not imagined pain. A physical sensation that seems to arise in the corresponding location on their own body. This is more common than you might expect. Studies suggest a significant percentage of people experience some form of tactile or pain sensation when observing injury to others. The sensation is usually mild, a twinge, a phantom ache, but it's present. Measurable through self-report and through physiological responses like changes in heart rate or skin conductance. The brain is simulating the injury so vividly that the simulation produces physical effects. This happens more intensely with people you're close to. Watching a loved one in pain activates your pain networks more strongly than watching a stranger. The mirror system amplifies the signal when emotional connection is high. Parents know this. Watching your child hurt can feel worse than being hurt yourself. The mirrored pain is vivid, and it comes with the added distress of being unable to take the pain away from them. The confusion between observed and felt pain also occurs with chronic exposure. Medical students early in their training sometimes develop phantom pains after watching procedures repeatedly. Their mirror systems have simulated the sensation so many times that the simulations start to feel real even outside the observation context. This usually fades with continued exposure. The brain adapts. The mirror response dampens, but the initial period can be disorienting. There's also a phenomenon where people avoid certain visual stimuli because the mirrored sensation is too strong. They can't watch someone get a blood draw, they can't watch certain sports injuries. The anticipated mirrored pain is enough to trigger avoidance. This isn't weakness, it's a sensitive mirror system combined with pain networks that respond readily to simulation. The system exists on a spectrum. Some people mirror pain intensely, others barely feel an echo. Most fall somewhere in the middle, experiencing mild discomfort when observing injury but nothing incapacitating. Interestingly, the mirroring isn't always symmetrical. You might mirror pain more intensely than pleasure, or you might mirror certain types of pain more than others. Touch-based pain might activate your mirror system more readily than internal pain. The brain uses your own experiences to inform the simulation. If you've had a broken bone, watching someone break a bone might produce a stronger mirrored response because your brain has a detailed template to draw from. If you've never experienced a particular type of injury, the mirroring might be less vivid. The simulation has less detail to work with. This is why medical professionals sometimes become more affected by certain injuries after experiencing them personally. The mirror system now has direct sensory data to incorporate into the simulation. Right now, there's no pain to witness, no injury to mirror. Your pain networks are quiet. The anterior cingulate cortex is still active, still monitoring for potential threats, but it's not processing mirrored distress. The somatosensory cortex isn't simulating sensations from someone else's body. Your body is just your body. The sensations are just your sensations. There's no confusion about ownership because there's nothing external to confuse with internal. The boundary is clear not because it's strong but because it's untested. And in the absence of observed pain, your nervous system settles. No phantom aches, no mirrored withdrawal responses, just the quiet of a body that only has to attend to itself. The difference begins at the cellular level. Mirror neurons exist in similar locations across most brains. Premotor cortex, inferior parietal lobule, superior temporal sulcus. The architecture is consistent, but the density varies. Some people have more mirror neurons in these regions, or the neurons they have are more excitable. They fire more readily in response to observed actions and emotions. This creates a stronger mirroring response. The internal simulation is more vivid. The felt sense of what someone else is experiencing is more intense. Other people have fewer mirror neurons, or neurons that require stronger stimulation to fire. Their mirroring is quieter. The simulation runs, but at lower amplitude. Neither configuration is better. Both allow for social functioning, but they create different subjective experiences of watching others. Genetics plays a role. Twin studies suggest that mirror neuron activity has heritable components. If your parents had sensitive mirror systems, you're more likely to have one as well, but experience shapes the system too. Early childhood matters. Infants who receive consistent, attuned caregiving develop stronger social mirroring. Their mirror systems learn to track emotional states accurately because those states were reflected back to them reliably. Children raised in neglectful or inconsistent environments sometimes develop weaker mirroring. Their brains learned that tracking others' emotional states wasn't particularly useful. The system adapted by reducing sensitivity. This isn't permanent. The mirror system remains plastic throughout life. It can strengthen or weaken based on experience. People who work in empathy-demanding professions sometimes show increased mirror neuron activity over time. Therapists, nurses, teachers, their brains have practiced mirroring so extensively that the circuits become more responsive. The opposite can also occur. Repeated exposure to others' distress without the ability to help can lead to reduced mirroring. The system dampens to protect against overwhelm. This is part of what happens in compassion fatigue. Gender shows some population-level differences. Studies suggest women, on average, show slightly stronger mirror neuron responses than men. But the variation within each group is larger than the variation between groups. Culture shapes mirroring patterns too. Some cultures emphasize emotional expressiveness and close attention to others' states. People raised in these contexts often develop more active mirror systems. Other cultures value emotional restraint and independence. The mirror system still functions, but it may be calibrated differently, responding less intensely to preserve emotional boundaries. Autism spectrum conditions involve altered mirroring patterns. Some autistic individuals show reduced mirror neuron activity, particularly for emotional expressions. This doesn't mean they lack empathy. It means the automatic mirroring pathway is less active. They may understand emotions through different routes, through pattern recognition, through cognitive analysis, through learned associations. The outcome can be similar, but the neural path differs. Interestingly, some autistic people report mirroring too much, not too little. They feel overwhelmed by others' emotional states but struggle to interpret them correctly. The mirror system fires intensely without providing clear information about what's being mirrored. Anxiety disorders can heighten mirroring. People with social anxiety often show increased mirror neuron activity. They are hypervigilant to social cues, tracking others' expressions and body language intensely. This creates a feedback loop. Strong mirroring leads to absorbing others' tension. Absorbed tension increases anxiety. Increased anxiety leads to more vigilant tracking. The cycle reinforces itself. Depression can reduce mirroring. The emotional blunting that accompanies some depressive states extends to mirrored emotions. You observe someone happy and feel less of an echo than you normally would. This contributes to the sense of disconnection that depression creates. The automatic bridge between you and others feels weakened. Personality traits correlate with mirroring strength. People high in trait empathy show stronger mirror responses. People high in emotional stability show more regulated responses. But correlation isn't destiny. You can be naturally empathic with a quiet mirror system. You can have intense mirroring with limited empathy. The systems interact but aren't identical. Age affects mirroring too. Children and adolescents often show strong unregulated mirroring. The circuits are active, but the inhibitory control is still developing. As the prefrontal cortex matures, mirroring becomes more modulated. You still mirror, but with better boundaries. The simulation runs without overwhelming you. In older age, some studies suggest mirroring intensity decreases slightly. Whether this reflects neural changes or accumulated emotional regulation skills isn't entirely clear. Meditation practices can alter mirroring patterns. Mindfulness training seems to help people notice mirroring when it occurs without being consumed by it. The mirror system still fires, but awareness creates space around the response. Compassion meditation may actually increase mirroring, while simultaneously increasing the capacity to manage what's mirrored. The system becomes more sensitive and more regulated at the same time. Physical factors matter too. Sleep deprivation reduces regulatory control over mirroring. You mirror more readily and less accurately when tired. Stress hormones affect the system. Cortisol can amplify emotional mirroring, making you more susceptible to catching others' anxiety or distress. Even blood sugar levels play a role. The prefrontal cortex requires significant glucose to function. When glucose is low, your ability to regulate mirroring weakens. Right now, these factors are quieting. Your stress hormones are dropping as you prepare for sleep. Your prefrontal cortex is reducing activity. The regulatory systems are easing their grip. But there's nothing to regulate, no mirroring to modulate. The system that varies so much between people, that responds to genetics and experience and state, is simply resting. Whatever your baseline is, sensitive or muted, amplified or dampened, it doesn't matter at the moment. The mirror neurons are waiting, quiet, until tomorrow brings new faces to read. The gap exists in the hundreds of milliseconds between stimulus and awareness. You see a face change expression. Your visual cortex processes the information first, sends it forward through multiple pathways simultaneously. One pathway reaches your mirror system before it reaches your conscious perception. So the mirroring begins while you're still technically unaware of what you're looking at. Your face has started to shift. Your motor cortex has activated patterns associated with the observed expression. The emotional centers have begun their response. All of this unfolds in silence below the threshold of awareness. By the time you consciously register, "This person looks sad," your body has already started preparing a response to sadness. This delay between automatic response and conscious awareness is fundamental to how the brain works. The conscious mind is slow. It requires extensive processing to bring something into awareness. The automatic systems are faster because they don't wait for conscious verification. The mirror system lives in this automatic layer. It doesn't need your permission. It doesn't wait for you to understand what you're seeing. It responds to the raw sensory data and begins its work immediately. This is efficient for survival. If you waited to consciously interpret every gesture or expression before responding, you'd be too slow. Social coordination would be impossible. Threat detection would lag. But it also means you're constantly responding to things you haven't fully processed yet. You might feel a surge of anxiety and only realize afterward that someone near you looked worried. The mirroring happened first. The recognition came later. The anxiety felt like it arose from nowhere because you weren't consciously tracking the source. Children live almost entirely in this automatic space. They mirror constantly without awareness. They cry when others cry, laugh when others laugh, without understanding that they're copying. The conscious layer that would recognize I'm mirroring hasn't developed yet. As you age, awareness grows. You start to notice the gap. You catch yourself responding to something before you've fully understood it. You feel tension rising and trace it back to someone else's posture. You notice your face shifting and realize you're copying an expression. But the gap never closes. The automatic response continues to arrive before conscious recognition. You just become better at noticing it after the fact. The gap is where empathy begins, probably. Before you've decided to care, before you've thought about what someone needs, your body has already started simulating their state. The empathy arrives as a physical fact before it becomes a conscious choice. This makes empathy feel spontaneous, like something that happens to you rather than something you do, because in a sense, it is. The automatic mirroring creates the initial empathic response and consciousness inherits it. But the gap is also where mirroring can mislead you. Your body responds to micro-expressions the other person might not even be aware they're making. You mirror a fleeting look of discomfort, and suddenly you're tense. But if you ask them, they might say they're fine. Your automatic system picked up something subtle, maybe accurate, maybe not. But your body responded before you could verify. The gap becomes more complicated with deliberate deception. Someone smiles, but the smile is forced. Your mirror system might respond to the surface expression, activating happiness patterns, while another part of your brain notices something is wrong. The mismatch creates unease. You feel uncomfortable but can't say why, because the automatic mirroring and the conscious assessment are giving conflicting information, and the gap between them makes the conflict hard to name. Actors exploit this gap constantly. They produce expressions deliberately, and your mirror system responds to them as if they were spontaneous. You know intellectually that the performance is artificial, but your body mirrors it anyway. The gap between what you know and what you feel creates the emotional impact of theatre. The same thing happens with photograph. A frozen expression, no genuine emotion behind it. But your mirror neurons respond to the visual pattern. They simulate the expression. You feel something in response to an image, to an arrangement of pixels, because the automatic system doesn't distinguish between real and represented faces well. Even cartoon faces trigger the mirror system. Simplified features, exaggerated expressions. Your brain knows they're not real, but the mirroring happens in the gap before that knowledge matters. This is part of why animation works emotionally. The gap allows your body to respond to obvious fabrications as if they were genuine. The gap is longer when you're tired. The conscious mind slows down even more than usual. The automatic responses continue at their normal speed. So the distance between what your body is doing and what you're aware of widens. You might find yourself mirroring more intensely when exhausted, not because the mirror system is stronger, but because the conscious oversight is weaker. You're operating more fully in automatic mode. Dreams seem to eliminate the gap entirely or reverse it. You become aware of emotions and sensations that have no external source. The mirroring system might be generating responses to imagined faces, imagined scenarios, and consciousness experiences them as if they were real. But awake, the gap persists. The space between seeing and knowing, between response and recognition, between the body's automatic preparation and the mind's slower understanding. Right now, the gap is irrelevant. There are no faces to see before you know you're seeing them, no expressions to mirror before you've recognized them. The automatic and conscious layers of your experience are converging because there's nothing to process. The silence isn't just the absence of external stimuli. It's the absence of that constant slight lag, that feeling of catching up to what your body has already begun doing. For once, everything is synchronized, slow, aligned. The gap between observation and awareness closes not because the systems have sped up or slowed down, but because there's nothing to observe, nothing to mirror before knowing, nothing to respond to before understanding. Just the quiet of a nervous system that doesn't have to stay ahead of itself anymore. There's particular discomfort that comes from witnessing distress you cannot alleviate, a feeling that sits somewhere between helplessness and tension, and it arises not just from caring, but from the fact that your mirror system has prepared your body to respond, while circumstance prevents any actual response from occurring. You see someone struggling and your motor cortex activates patterns associated with helping, with reaching, with intervening. But social context or physical distance or explicit instruction keeps you still, and the prepared action remains trapped in potential. The neural sequence activated but never completed, and this incomplete activation creates a residual tension that doesn't resolve easily because the body expected to act and was denied. The mirror system doesn't distinguish well between situations where a response is possible and situations where it isn't. It simply detects distress or need in another person and begins preparing your body to address it, mobilizing resources, activating muscles, organizing motor plans, and when those preparations lead nowhere, when the action that was rehearsed internally never manifests externally, the energy that was gathered for response has no outlet, no way to discharge, and it lingers in your nervous system as unresolved arousal. This is part of why watching suffering on screens can be so draining, not just emotionally, but physically, because your body responds to the witnessed distress as if it were happening in your immediate environment, as if intervention were possible, and the mirror system activates helping responses that have nowhere to go. You can't reach through the screen, can't change what's happening, but your nervous system has already begun mobilizing as if you could, and that mobilization without resolution accumulates as a particular kind of fatigue. Healthcare workers encounter this constantly, situations where they witness pain or distress that current medical knowledge cannot fully address, where the limits of treatment mean that mirrored suffering has no adequate outlet. They can provide comfort or palliation but not cure, and their mirror systems continue responding to the patient's distress, even when their conscious minds understand that nothing more can be done. And this creates an ongoing tension between the automatic empathic response and the reality of limited intervention. The body doesn't know about medical limitations or social constraints or the impossibility of certain kinds of help. It only knows that it has detected distress in another person and prepared to respond. And when that response is blocked or incomplete, the preparatory state persists. Heart rate stays slightly elevated, muscles remain subtly tensed, stress hormones continue circulating at levels appropriate for action that isn't occurring, and this physiological readiness without corresponding action becomes wearing over time. There's also the mirroring that occurs when you understand what someone needs but lack the resources to provide it, when you can see exactly what would help but don't have access to it. And your mirror system has created an internal model of the helpful action, has activated the motor plans and emotional patterns associated with providing that help. But external reality prevents the internal model from becoming external action, and this gap between simulated helping and actual helping creates its own form of distress. Parents experience this acutely with children. The moments when you can feel your child's emotional pain with vivid clarity through your mirror system, but cannot take the pain away, cannot shield them from necessary difficulties, cannot solve what needs to be solved for them, and your body responds to their distress as if it were your own distress, while simultaneously holding the knowledge that intervention would be counterproductive or impossible. And these competing imperatives create a particular strain that doesn't resolve until the child's distress resolves. The unresolved quality seems to matter more than the intensity. It's not necessarily that witnessing severe distress is harder than witnessing mild distress, although that can be true, but rather that witnessing distress you cannot effectively respond to creates more physiological residue than witnessing distress you can address. Because action provides closure for the mirror system, it allows the prepared response to complete, allows the mobilized energy to discharge, and in the absence of action, the system remains in a state of suspended readiness. This might explain why people sometimes report feeling worse after watching documentary footage of distant suffering than after directly helping someone in their community, even though the suffering in the documentary might be objectively more severe. Because direct helping provides an outlet for the mirrored distress, allows the empathic response to complete its cycle, while witnessed suffering without possibility of intervention leaves the cycle incomplete. The mirror system activated with nowhere to direct its output. The body tries to resolve this in various ways, sometimes through symbolic actions that aren't directly helpful but create a sense of response, sharing information about the suffering, donating money to relevant causes, expressing concern verbally. These actions don't directly alleviate the mirrored distress source, but they provide some outlet for the mobilized energy, some way for the body to feel that it has responded, even if the response is indirect or inadequate. Other times the body simply holds the unresolved activation until it eventually dissipates through metabolic process. The stress hormones are reabsorbed, the muscle tension gradually releases, the elevated arousal slowly returns to baseline. But this passive resolution takes longer than active resolution would, and if you encounter more instances of unresolvable distress before the previous activation has fully cleared, the effects can accumulate, building toward a chronic state of physiological arousal without adequate discharge. It's not entirely clear whether there are long-term consequences to repeated unresolved mirroring, whether the body adapts to this pattern, or whether it creates lasting changes in stress responsiveness or emotional regulation. The research on this specific question remains incomplete, but anecdotal reports from people in professions with high exposure to unresolvable suffering suggest that something does change over time, either a numbing of the mirror response or a chronic low-level activation that becomes the new normal. Right now, there's no distress to mirror and therefore no unresolved impulse to help, no prepared action that cannot manifest, no mobilized energy seeking an outlet that doesn't exist. Your mirror system is inactive and therefore your body holds no residual tension from empathic responses that went nowhere. And perhaps this is another dimension of what rest provides. Not just cessation of mirroring, but cessation of the particular strain that comes from mirroring without resolution, from feeling what others feel while being unable to change what others experience. The body settles into a state where all its preparations are either completed or unnecessary, where nothing is being rehearsed that cannot be enacted, where the gap between internal simulation and external action has closed simply because simulation has stopped, and in that closure there's a kind of peace that comes not from solving anything, but from temporarily not needing to try. The mirroring can't continue indefinitely. Your brain has limited resources, attention is finite, energy is finite. Neural circuits can only maintain activity for so long before they need to recover. So there are systems that regulate when mirroring begins and when it ends. Attention plays the largest role. When you focus on someone, your mirror neurons fire more intensely. When your attention shifts elsewhere, the activity decreases. This happens naturally in conversation. You attend to someone while they're speaking. Your mirror system tracks their expressions, their gestures, their emotional tone. Then you begin speaking and your attention shifts inward toward organizing your own thoughts. The mirroring doesn't stop completely, but it reduces. The shift is automatic, driven by the demands of the task. Speaking requires different neural resources than listening. Your brain reallocates, but sometimes the reallocation doesn't happen smoothly. Your attention lingers on the other person even when it should shift. The mirroring continues when it's no longer useful. This happens more with worry. You finish a conversation but keep replaying their expressions. Your mirror system keeps activating as you remember their face, their tone, the subtle signs of distress you noticed. The mirroring has become detached from observation. It's running on memory now, and memory-based mirroring can loop indefinitely if nothing interrupts it. Rumination works this way. You keep mentally returning to an interaction. Each time your mirror neurons respond as if you're seeing the person again. The emotional activation renews, the cycle continues. Breaking the loop requires deliberate attention shift, engaging with something else. Giving your mirror system new input or no input at all. Physical distance helps. When someone leaves your presence, the sensory input stops. Your mirror system has nothing current to track. It can only activate based on memory, and memory-based activation is usually weaker than perception-based activation. But not always. Sometimes the memory is vivid enough to produce strong mirroring. You think about someone in distress and your body responds almost as intensely as if they were in front of you. The brain also uses habituation. When you're exposed to the same stimulus repeatedly, the neural response diminishes over time. The neurons stop firing as vigorously. This protects against overload. If you spend all day with someone, your mirror system doesn't maintain peak activity for 8 hours straight. It habituates. The response settles into a lower, sustainable level. But habituation can go too far. You become so accustomed to someone's presence that you stop mirroring them meaningfully. You're not noticing their emotional shifts anymore. The system has tuned them out. Long-term relationships sometimes struggle with this. The mirror system has habituated so thoroughly that partners stop really seeing each other. They miss subtle distress signals because the automatic tracking has decreased. Novelty reactivates mirroring. When something changes in someone's typical pattern, your mirror system perks up again. A familiar person showing unfamiliar emotion captures attention. The mirroring intensifies temporarily. Then habituation resumes. The new pattern becomes familiar. The response settles. Sleep naturally terminates mirroring. When you lose consciousness, the mirror system goes offline along with most other sensory and motor processes. There's nothing to observe, no faces to track. This is restorative. The circuits rest. Neurotransmitters replenish. The system resets to baseline. But some people report dreaming about faces, about interactions that feel emotionally charged. The mirror system might be active during certain sleep stages, responding to internally generated images rather than external stimuli. These dreams can feel exhausting. You wake feeling like you've been in intense social interaction all night, because in some neural sense you have been. The prefrontal cortex helps decide when mirroring should stop. It evaluates whether continued mirroring serves a purpose, whether the simulation is providing useful information or just consuming resources. When functioning well, it can override unnecessary mirroring, shut down the rumination, redirect attention, impose boundaries on the automatic system. But the prefrontal cortex requires energy. When depleted, its regulatory capacity weakens. The mirroring continues unchecked. You can't stop thinking about someone's expression, can't stop feeling the echo of their emotion. This is why exhaustion makes emotional regulation harder. The system that would normally terminate mirroring isn't working properly. Context also matters. In social situations, mirroring continues because it's useful. You're actively coordinating with others. The simulation helps you predict and respond. In solitude, mirroring should quiet, but sometimes it doesn't. You're alone but still tracking imagined reactions, still simulating conversations, still mirroring people who aren't present. This can be adaptive in small amounts, mental rehearsal of social situations, planning future interactions, but when it dominates solitary time, it prevents actual rest. The body has signals that suggest mirroring should stop: fatigue, muscle tension, the vague discomfort of sustained activation. These signals tell you to disengage, but you can override them. Keep pushing through social interaction even when your system is asking for a break. The mirroring continues, but its quality degrades. You're tracking less accurately, missing cues, responding poorly. Eventually something gives. Either you withdraw, or the system starts shutting down defensively, reducing mirroring to preserve resources. Right now, the decision about when to stop mirroring is irrelevant. There's been nothing to mirror. No need for the regulatory systems to intervene and halt a process that never began. The mechanisms sit quiet, ready to engage tomorrow when faces appear again. When the mirror neurons start firing and need to be managed, modulated, eventually stopped. But tonight, they're unnecessary. The mirroring is already absent. The question of when it should end doesn't arise. Just the stillness of a system that's already quiet, already resting, already stopped. Sometimes you catch yourself making a gesture that doesn't feel like yours, a particular way of moving your hand while speaking or tilting your head while listening, and when you notice it, you realize it belongs to someone else, someone you've spent time around, someone whose movements your brain has been quietly absorbing and storing, not as visual memories, but as motor patterns, as sequences your own muscles could reproduce. This happens because the mirror system doesn't just activate during observation and then disappear. It leaves traces. Neural pathways that fired while watching someone move become slightly more likely to fire again later, even without the original stimulus present. Your motor cortex has learned the shape of someone else's gesture through repeated simulation. The movement has become part of your repertoire even though you never consciously practiced it. Children do this constantly. They pick up mannerisms from parents, from teachers, from friends, not through deliberate imitation but through automatic absorption. The mirror system watches and rehearses, and eventually the rehearsed movement becomes available for spontaneous use. You've probably noticed yourself using a phrase the way someone else uses it, with their rhythm, their inflection. This is vocal mirroring that's been stored. Your brain has mapped not just the words, but the motor pattern of producing them in that specific way. The stored patterns can remain dormant for years. Then something triggers them. A similar context, a similar emotional state. And suddenly you're moving the way someone from your past moved, speaking the way they spoke, without having thought about them consciously. This suggests that everyone you've spent significant time observing has left motor traces in your brain. Small fragments of their movement vocabulary stored alongside your own. Available for retrieval under the right conditions, some gestures stick more than others. The ones you observed most frequently. The ones accompanied by strong emotion. The ones made by people you paid close attention to. Your brain has been collecting these patterns since infancy. Every caregiver, every peer, every person you watched closely enough for your mirror system to engage. They're all there in some form, woven into your motor memory. This is part of how culture transmits itself, not through explicit instruction, but through bodies watching bodies. You absorb the movement patterns of your community, the way people gesture in conversation, the way they express emotion physically, the way they occupy space. These patterns feel natural because you've internalized them through mirroring, but they're learned. If you'd grown up in a different community, your spontaneous gestures would be different because your mirror system would have absorbed different patterns. Even professional movements get stored this way. Musicians who watch other musicians absorb technical gestures, athletes watching athletes. The mirror system is learning motor sequences that can later be accessed for performance. This is why watching skilled movement helps you learn. You're not just getting visual information about what to do, your brain is actually practicing the movement internally, creating motor memories before you've physically attempted the action. Dancers know this. They watch choreography and their bodies begin learning it through simulation. When they finally move, they're not starting from zero. The pattern already exists in their motor system, but the stored gestures aren't always helpful. Sometimes you absorb movement patterns you'd rather not have. A nervous habit from someone anxious. A defensive posture from someone guarded. The mirror system doesn't discriminate. It stores what it observes frequently. You might notice yourself adopting someone's mannerisms during a difficult period of your life, and then carrying those mannerisms forward, even after the relationship ends. The movements have become part of your motor vocabulary. Some people deliberately curate who they spend time around partly because of this. They know they'll absorb patterns. They choose carefully whose patterns to absorb. Others don't think about it until they catch themselves making a gesture and realize it came from someone they haven't seen in years. The motor memory surfacing unexpectedly. The brain doesn't label these stored patterns clearly. It doesn't mark them as borrowed versus original. They're just available movement sequences, part of the collection your motor cortex can draw from. This makes the question of authenticity complicated. How much of your spontaneous physical expression is genuinely yours versus absorbed from others through mirroring? The line is genuinely unclear. Everyone is a mosaic of observed movements, gestures inherited through watching, patterns copied unconsciously and integrated so thoroughly they feel native. Your body moves the way bodies around you have moved. The mirror system ensured that. It watched and rehearsed and stored, and now those stored patterns emerge in your own movement, indistinguishable from gestures you developed independently. Right now, in stillness, none of these stored patterns are active. Your body isn't gesturing, isn't moving through space, isn't drawing from the vast collection of mirrored movements it's accumulated over years. The motor memories are still there, filed away, quiet, but not in use, just the body at rest, not rehearsing anyone else's movements, not reproducing patterns absorbed from observation, not expressing anything it learned through mirroring. Tomorrow those patterns will be available again. You'll gesture without thinking, and somewhere in that gesture will be traces of everyone you've watched closely, their movements living on through yours. But tonight the collection sits unused, the stored patterns wait, and your body for these few hours moves only in breath, simple, uncomplicated by borrowed motion. There's a quality to the hours before sleep that differs from the rest of the day. The mirror system begins to quiet naturally, not all at once, but gradually. As social interaction decreases and the faces around you disappear, your brain has been working since you woke, tracking expressions, simulating gestures, processing emotional states that weren't originally yours. The mirror neurons have fired thousands of times. The circuits are tired. Sleep offers something the waking world cannot. Complete cessation of mirroring. No one to observe, no emotional states to absorb, no gestures to rehearse internally. This isn't just physical rest. It's a specific kind of neural rest that only happens when the mirror system goes offline. During the day, even alone, you might replay interactions. Your mirror neurons responding to remembered faces. The system stays partially active, processing the social residue of earlier encounters. But in deep sleep, that processing stops. The mirror system requires conscious or semi-conscious awareness to function. True unconsciousness silences it completely. Your anterior cingulate cortex stops responding to phantom pain. Your motor cortex stops simulating observed movements. Your emotional centers stop tracking states that belong to other people. For the first time since you woke, your nervous system is attending only to you. Your own sensations, your own internal state, nothing borrowed, nothing mirrored. This restoration is necessary. The circuits that enable empathy and social connection need recovery time. They need hours where they're not being asked to blur the boundary between self and other. Without this rest, the system degrades. You've probably felt it after sleepless nights. Emotions feel less stable. Social cues become harder to read. The mirroring still happens, but it's less accurate, less controlled. Sleep repairs this, allows the mirror neurons to reset, clears the metabolic waste that accumulated during their activity, replenishes the neurotransmitters they depleted. When you wake, the system will be ready again, ready to observe and simulate and understand through resonance. But that readiness depends on these hours of complete disengagement. The rest also helps consolidate what the mirror system learned during the day. New gestures observed, new emotional patterns encountered, new motor sequences to store. Sleep seems to help integrate these mirrored experiences, sort them, decide which patterns to retain and which to discard. The system practices in a different way during sleep, not through observation but through internal reorganization. But mostly sleep offers absence. The mirror system simply stops working, stops trying to understand others through simulation, stops preparing responses to emotional states it's detecting. Your body has been carrying pieces of other people all day, their anxiety, their joy, their pain. Small fragments absorb through automatic mirroring. Sleep releases those fragments, lets them dissolve. You wake slightly emptier of others, slightly more returned to yourself. This cycle repeats daily. Connection through mirroring during waking hours. Release through silence during sleep. The rhythm keeps the system functional. Too much mirroring without rest leads to overwhelm. Too much isolation without mirroring leads to a different kind of atrophy. You need both. The reaching toward others that mirroring enables, and the withdrawal into yourself that sleep provides. Right now you're in that withdrawal. The mirror neurons quieting as consciousness fades, the constant tracking of other minds finally ceasing. Your brain doesn't need to understand anyone else tonight, doesn't need to simulate their experience or predict their behavior or absorb their emotional state. It can rest from the work of empathy. Not because empathy isn't valuable, but because even valuable systems need to stop. The mirroring will return tomorrow. It always does. You'll see a face and your neurons will veskey. You'll watch someone move and your motor cortex will rehearse. You'll witness emotion and feel the echo. But tonight, none of that is required. The system that connects you to others has permission to disconnect, to go quiet, to rest. Your body settles deeper, breath slowing, thought scattering, the boundary between you and sleep thinning. And somewhere in that thinning, the last traces of mirroring fade. The neurons stop firing, the simulations end. You're alone in a way you can only be alone in sleep. Just your own mind, your own body, your own quiet existence, separate, still, resting from the work of understanding. The mirror system will wake with you, ready to connect again, ready to blur the boundaries that keep you isolated, ready to help you feel what others feel. But for now, it sleeps, and so do you. Thank you for spending this time with the Sleepy Biologist. If you enjoyed this exploration of mirror neurons and empathy, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps others find these sleep-friendly biology journeys. Channel members receive early access to new videos and exclusive content, and your support through membership or super thanks makes creating these narrations possible. Feel free to leave a comment about where you're listening from or what biological topic you'd like to explore next. Rest well.